All right, dentist, the type of practice that you buy will be the most important decision that you'll make in your entire career. So if you want to make sure that you're making the right decision, then this is the video for you. Over the past 12 years, I have done a lot of different types of dental practices, pretty much all the different types that are available. I have done either startups or acquisitions. I've done Medicaid type practices, PPO involvement, fee for service, or a combination of all the above. And all these types of practices, I've learned different things. And my hope is that I can help you learn from my experience and my mistakes so that when you make that crucial decision, it actually is going to be the right fit for you and it can truly make an impact and a difference in your life. So when talking about these different types of practices, I'm going to break it down into 4 different types. You have one is a budget startup. Then there's one I like to call an ideal startup. And then you have the acquisitions. And one is an equity acquisition, and then one is more of a cash flow acquisition. So let's start with the budget startups. Now, I've done a number of these, and a budget startup is something where you probably don't have to do much or any build out. So your startup costs are much lower, it's a lot lower risk, and it can happen pretty quick. And typically you're going to be using cheaper equipment and a little bit more of a bootstrap situation. Now, one of the practices that I've done, I've done probably 3 of these types of practices, and they've been great. And at the time in my career, they were actually perfect. You know, I had a doctor, I was looking for an opportunity that we could start up a practice and offset some of our debt. I wanted to grow, but I didn't want to keep taking on so much debt. So I looked for different opportunities where maybe a dental practice merged with somewhere else and left a location available. Maybe a practice failed or a doctor retired, but he couldn't sell his practice. And you might think that it's, why would you want to move into a place that the previous doctor didn't do well in? And normally that would be true, but the type of practice that you're doing and the location and all those variables, there actually can be some pretty good fits. So we've done that multiple times and it's really been great. Obviously, a lot of the cons are you have an older practice, you have no patience, and it's often going to be a little more dated. And in most situations, the location maybe isn't the most ideal. So then from there, there's the category I call the ideal startup. And this is something where you basically do it all. You get to go and look at your demographics reports, you get to plan out the location and really control the visibility. You get to think about what your branding is going to be. You get to map out really the whole process. You can design your rooms the way you want them. You can really do this for the type of dentistry that you envision. Now, obviously it's a lot more risk and it's a lot more expensive, but with these practices, it's great because in the long term, you typically are going to have a great location that's going to hold up and do well for decades to come. And you really get the team that you want, the layout, the workflow, everything is just the way that you want it. So it does take a while. It's a little bit more expensive. You're typically going to be spending at least $500,000 getting this thing up and going, but you're getting something that really can be a great long-term component or tool in your life. Now, if you are looking at something where maybe you're not as concerned about the money, your current income needs, you can manage that, you have a strategy for that, you have the time, and you're really looking for something for the next 10, 20 plus years, that's where these ideal startups can really be important. Now, then if we go on to the acquisitions, I'd like to classify those as equity and a cash flow acquisition. Now, an equity acquisition is something that basically has a lot of upside. You're going to get into something where you don't have to pay a ton for it, and you're looking to get equity quickly. So this type of practice was the first practice that I bought right out of dental school. So probably a month or 2 out of school, I found a practice that fit this definition pretty well. They were probably doing maybe $30,000 a month, maybe close to $400,000 a year. And it wasn't super fancy, wasn't nice inside. They had a lot of signs of pretty dysfunctional systems, so a lot of opportunity there. Their AR was like $800,000, which is crazy for what they are producing. It's like 2 years worth of production. And there was tons of upside everywhere. A lot of the work was maybe not the latest or the greatest, and so tons of upside in all of the existing patient pool. There was, a lot of upside. Location wasn't too bad, but a little bit hidden maybe. But it was, something that everywhere I looked, I found an opportunity. There was no marketing being done. The fees hadn't been adjusted or fine-tuned for a long time. Insurance contracts haven't been negotiated forever. All these things lined up to where it was a pretty safe bet that I could get this and improve it. Now, typically with an equity acquisition, you're really looking for something that in a very short amount of time, you can double the practice at least. You want to be pretty quickly in a strong equity position. Now, the downsides on these is that initially, you're probably not going to make a ton of money. And you need to be aware of that. But the cool thing is that if you can, weather a little bit of time while you're improving the practice, you can really quickly actually be in a pretty great spot. And so this is a great one for a lot of people that are looking to, be a little more, if they're a little more debt averse, you want a little lower risk, but you still want to have an opportunity to have your own practice. This can be a good, and it kind of feels a little bit safer as well than a lot of the other options. Now, the last option is more of a cash flow acquisition. And I would describe this as something that you feel like you can buy, jump right in, and you're able to sustain your lifestyle. You have instant cash flow from day one. Now, this would be something, it's going to be a larger practice typically. It's going to be, have a lot more stability. The doctor's probably been there for quite a while. A little more turnkey. It's got a good team already. It's already has some online presence. New patient flow is pretty solid. You compare that to these equity acquisitions, and the equity acquisitions, almost all of them have like 8 new patients a month. Very low new patient flow. However, the cash flow ones that have stability, they're going to be having at least 25 to 30 new patients a month. And that's enough to really balance out the attrition that a typical practice is going to have. So with a cash flow practice, you really want something where you feel like you can jump in this. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, do anything too crazy. You can kind of just put yourself in there and you're going to be making enough money to live, be comfortable, and be happy. And so that is a great option. Now the downsides is that you're going to pay for that type of stability. You're going to pay a lot more for the practice. It's going to cost you probably double or more than what you pay for an equity acquisition, but it's kind of nice. It's a lot closer to a guarantee than anything else that we've talked about. But sometimes you might not qualify for a big enough loan to do that. Depending on your experience or your banking relationships, you may or may not be able to do it quite in this way. And that's okay because there's other options. But this is a fantastic way to do it. And I've often found that a lot of people would be better off doing this type of a practice because you don't need the business skills, you don't need the experience, you don't need all of that real world knowledge to really grow and work magic in a new area. It's already, an established thing. You just have to learn how to keep it going. So for a lot of people, this is probably the best option to go. But again, you're going to be paying that loan for 10 years and it's going to be expensive, but it's a great option. And I do quite a bit of these. Now, an important thing to do is to really map out your goals and map out what your strengths are. Your personality and your skills really need to match the different type of practice that you're looking for, and also the phase of your life. When I was not too far out of school, a lot of these high sweat equity positions actually seemed pretty exciting and pretty fun to me. I was very excited to do all sorts of, budget startups or equity plays with my acquisitions, and that was pretty exciting. But I probably would not do as many of those things right now. And so it just depends. If you're a phase in your life where maybe you're not married or you don't have a lot of kids and you can spend a lot more time outside of the home and you can invest yourself into some of these high sweat equity plays, then absolutely, you should totally go for it because there is a lot of upside when doing that. But the biggest recommendation that I'd have for you is sit down and look at what your objectives are. What are your goals? What are you wanting to do? What matches your personality? Are you pretty entrepreneurial? If you are, a startup or an equity acquisition might be just the right thing. Are you just enjoying clinical and nothing else? Well, then you might want to buy something that's a little more turnkey with a cash flow acquisition. The biggest thing that I would recommend, that once you've decided what type of a practice that you're looking to get, then make sure that the practice that you buy truly fits that, because every practice is different. You're going to have practices that from day one and based on the numbers already have great cash flow. You're going to have practices where there's tons of upside, whether that's like clinical upside, fees, maybe your procedures, the amount of marketing, maybe the demographics or future growth look fantastic. Maybe the location has good visibility, or maybe not. Maybe there's already great online visibility. Maybe they have a ton of capacity for growth, and maybe the type of dentistry, there's lots of upside as well. But you'll want to make sure whatever practice that you choose and the category that you choose actually fits that one. For example, I did an equity acquisition probably 5-6 years ago. It was fantastic. It was actually a practice that the doctor medically couldn't continue. And so it had been sitting without anything happening for like 3-4 weeks. And he realized he couldn't come back. So we actually bought that and we moved very quickly. So within 7 days, we bought the practice, and it was fantastic because it was in a building, and just a standalone building, and we were able to make a deal where if we paid market rates for the building, they basically would throw in the practice for free. So we paid market rates for the building, got the practice for free, and historically, I think he was probably doing $35,000 a month out of that practice. But in a very short amount of time, we're able to get that probably 3-4 months later. We were averaging in probably $55,000 to $56,000 a month for that practice. So you compare that to your different options, where now we have a practice in 3 to 4 months that's probably worth $600,000, and we didn't pay anything for it. And even if we did pay $100,000 or $150,000 for it, you can see how quickly you can turn that into something where you have a good equity play. And if you have the equity, now you could either enjoy the equity and feel good about it, or you can borrow against it to do other things. So you do have a lot of opportunity with equity acquisitions. And imagine if you just did something like that, take $300,000 or $400,000 out of that practice, and then use that to buy real estate or do something else. So there is a strong place for equity acquisitions if you can pull it off. Now, the other thing too is, let's say you're wanting to buy a cash flow practice. Now, I see this all the time. You want a practice that has stability and is turnkey, and you buy it, but the problem is the way that the doctor that's purchasing the practice operates, they actually operate differently than the previous owner. So they look at a previous practice and it was profitable, but then they come into this cash flow acquisition, and all of a sudden they change up enough things and do things differently, just enough to where now it's no longer a great cash flowing practice. So be very aware of that. If you're going to buy an equity acquisition, make sure you have tremendous upside from day one. And if you're buying a cash flow acquisition, make sure that with whatever you do and how you practice, that you will have at least the same or higher cash flow from day one. The worst situation you can get in is buying an equity acquisition and then all of a sudden, like, you have no upside. Now you're stuck in this little practice that can't grow. And it's a really bad situation to be in. And I know a bunch of dentists that have really struggled, and it's taken years out of their career because they've had to manage and be stuck in this situation. Once you buy a practice, it's yours. You can't just return it after 6 months or a month. You can't flip it very easily, especially depending on the type of practice. So you really have to make the right decision on this. So make sure whatever practice, whatever one fits, that it actually is what you expect. Now, sometimes you can, strike gold with the practice that you're trying to get. One practice that we bought probably a couple years ago, this is a great example of a cash flow acquisition. It was doing probably around $160,000 a month. And it was great because the numbers from day one, it was closer to a fee-for-service practice. And so it really cash flowed and it was looking great. But the cool thing about it, it was getting great high new patient flow, but there was tremendous upside. They were referring out a ton of stuff, very low marketing, very low online presence. there was just a ton of opportunities for growth and a ton of procedures they weren't doing. So we were able to jump into that very quickly. And before long, we were averaging probably like 215 just from the basic way of operating and the procedures that we could offer. So that's, an example. Sometimes you get super lucky and you find a great, fantastic practice that cash flows, but then also has the upside. But that's not super common. But if you can find ones out there like that, you should for sure act on it because they are just fantastic. So I hope that going through each of these type of acquisitions have helped you understand that you have short-term plays, you have long-term plays. You have plays where you are going to have great cash flow in the beginning, and you have plays where you have no cash flow and tons of equity and everything in between. So choose the type of situation that most fits your life and your situation, and that'll hopefully set you up for tremendous success. So if you found anything that was helpful here, please subscribe for more content like this, and I appreciate you watching the video, and let's keep working together to help make dentistry more fun, fulfilling, and rewarding.